Indy Nova had always been driven by an idea. Ever since she was a child, she had been fascinated by technology and how things worked. By the time she reached adulthood, Indy had poured her heart and soul into developing a revolutionary app, one that could change the way people interacted with their devices. She worked tirelessly, often staying up late into the night, coding and testing, refining her creation. She knew the potential was huge, but she also knew the importance of protecting her work. That's why, before officially launching the app, she made sure to get a patent for it, an important step to secure her invention. Things had been moving fast. The app launched, and almost immediately, it gained attention. Customers were intrigued, and tech experts were impressed. Indy had created something special. The recognition felt surreal. But just as things started to look up, Indy's world took an unexpected turn. It all started with a phone call. Her sister Madison had always been a little more spotlight-hungry than Indy. Madison had often looked for ways to latch on to Indy's successes, whether it was in casual conversations or in more formal settings. But this time, it was different. Indy's sister didn't just try to be a part of Indy's success. She took full credit for it. At first, Indy thought it was just another one of Madison's jokes. But when Indy saw her sister being interviewed on a tech podcast, talking about how she had invented the app, Indy felt a wave of disbelief. Madison was out there, telling the world how the app was her idea, how she was the mastermind behind it. Indy's heart sank. It wasn't just the false credit that bothered her. It was the fact that her sister, someone who knew the hard work, the long hours, and the sacrifices Indy had made, was claiming it as her own. Indy felt a cold anger rise in her chest. She knew she had to do something, but she wasn't sure where to start. After the podcast, things only escalated. Madison began appearing at conferences, speaking about the app, signing deals, and even putting her own name on press releases as the founder. Indy was forced to watch in silence as Madison made herself the face of the business Indy had built from the ground up. Each time Indy tried to speak up, it was as if Madison would dismiss her, pretending like Indy was just a side note in the whole story. Indy didn't want to make a scene, but at the same time, she couldn't just let this go on. It wasn't just about the app. It was about everything she had worked for. The hours of sleepless nights, the times she'd pushed through self-doubt, and the financial risk she had taken to get the app off the ground. Indy had put her blood, sweat, and tears into this, and it hurt to see Madison take it all without so much as a thank you. Finally, Indy decided it was time to confront her sister. She needed to take a stand. She called Madison, her voice cold but steady. "We need to talk," Indy said, trying to keep her emotions in check. Madison was quick to pick up on the tension in Indy's tone. "What's going on, Indy?" she asked, a slight edge to her voice. Indy tried to hold her composure. "It's about the app," she began, her words slow and deliberate. "You've been telling everyone it's your idea. That's not true. You know it's not true. I'm the one who created it. I'm the one who got the patent." There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone. Madison tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Indy, you know I was involved. I helped you market it. I'm the one who got the investors on board. I've been working just as hard as you." Indy could feel the anger rising within her. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a full-on lie. "Madison," she said, her voice growing firmer, "you've been taking credit for something that's not yours. The patent is in my name. The idea was mine, and now you're trying to turn it into your own success. You can't just erase everything I've done." Indy's hands shook as she ended the call. She didn't want to fight with her sister, but she also couldn't let this go on any longer. The next step was clear. Indy needed to prove it, and she needed to show Madison and the world that this was her business. Indy reached out to her lawyer, who confirmed that the patent was indeed in her name. All the documents, every contract, every piece of paperwork, pointed to her as the rightful inventor and owner. The confirmation felt both satisfying and terrifying. Indy had the truth on her side, but she knew what was coming. Madison wasn't going to give up easily. Weeks passed, and Indy continued to watch as Madison's grasp on the business tightened. Madison began to boast more openly, even convincing some of their family members that she was the one responsible for the app's success. But Indy didn't back down. She started reaching out to key figures in the tech industry, the investors, and the partners Madison had been dealing with. Each conversation led to more revelations, and Indy quietly gathered proof. Madison was in deep, and Indy was prepared to pull the rug from under her. The final showdown came when Indy went public. She released a statement about the patent, laying out the truth for everyone to see. She made it clear that she was the one who had created the app, and she wasn't going to let Madison take credit for it anymore. Madison's reaction was one of pure shock. She had never expected Indy to come forward with such hard evidence. But Indy had been patient, waiting for the right moment. The backlash against Madison was swift. Investors backed out, sponsors dropped her, and the media began to question her integrity. Madison's carefully built image crumbled in front of her eyes, while Indy stood strong, knowing she had done what was right. It wasn't about revenge, though. For Indy, it was about reclaiming her narrative and ensuring that her hard work didn't go unnoticed. Slowly, people started to recognize Indy as the true founder of the app. Her company began to grow in a way it never had before. But this time, Indy was the one at the helm, proudly taking ownership of what she had created. As for Madison, she vanished from the business world, her reputation destroyed by her own lies. Indy had won not just the battle for her business, but also for her dignity. She had fought for what was hers, and in the end, that was enough. Indy's victory didn't come without its emotional toll. She'd always dreamed of a successful business, one that would make her proud. But the price she paid in terms of family ties was something she hadn't fully anticipated. Madison was no longer part of her life, not in the way she used to be, and that hurt. Indy had grown up with her sister, sharing childhood memories, secrets, and dreams. They had been close once, or at least Indy had thought so. Now, the rift between them seemed insurmountable. Every interaction felt like a battle, and every moment of success Indy had achieved in the business world felt bittersweet. Her family, too, seemed unsure of where to stand. Some of them sided with Madison, not fully understanding Indy's reasons for going public. Others, like their parents, expressed their concern, wondering if this rift could ever heal. Indy had spent countless hours thinking about her family and the sacrifices they had all made over the years. She had tried to do what was right, but in doing so, she felt like she'd lost the connection to the people she had once relied on most. Still, she couldn't let guilt cloud her sense of justice. Madison had crossed a line, and Indy had no choice but to take the stand she did. The business, however, was thriving. With the patent secured and the truth out in the open, Indy started to see her vision unfold in ways she had only imagined. More investors came on board, people who recognized her for what she was, a driven, innovative entrepreneur who had built something from the ground up. Indy was no longer just a small-time coder with a big idea. She had transformed into a leader, someone whose name was now synonymous with success. The app's popularity exploded, and Indy was busy managing the day-to-day operations, expanding her team, and refining her product. There was a new energy surrounding her business, one that hadn't been there before. But the success came with its own set of challenges. The pressure to keep growing, to keep innovating, was overwhelming at times. Indy had always been the kind of person who preferred working behind the scenes, but now she was thrust into the spotlight more than ever. Media outlets wanted to hear her story, investors wanted to meet with her, and her growing team needed guidance. It was exhilarating, but also exhausting. For the first time, Indy realized just how much she had been carrying on her own. The weight of her business, the responsibility of her team, and the lingering feelings of betrayal all weighed heavily on her. During one particularly long night at the office, Indy sat alone, reviewing the latest round of financials. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the tapping of her keyboard. She rubbed her eyes, feeling the strain of the past few months. Despite all the external success, she felt a bit lost. This wasn't the dream she had imagined all those years ago, when it was just her and her computer, working on something that could change the world. Back then, it was about the idea, the spark of inspiration. Now, it was about keeping that spark alive in a sea of demands and expectations. It felt like a different world altogether. As she leaned back in her chair, Indy thought about Madison again. It was hard not to. She had been part of her life for so long, and even now, with all the success, the ghost of their fractured relationship hung over her. She wondered if there would ever be a time when they could sit down and talk about everything that had happened. Could they ever rebuild what was broken? Or had the lies Madison told been too much to repair? Indy wasn't sure, but she did know one thing. She couldn't let that uncertainty cloud her path forward. She had worked too hard to let anything derail her progress now. The following week, Indy was invited to speak at a major tech conference. It was a big moment for her first time speaking to a crowd of industry leaders, investors, and innovators. As she prepared her speech, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She had fought for her business, fought for her truth, and now she was about to stand in front of an audience and tell her story. For the first time in a long while, Indy felt ready to face the future. The past, with all its betrayals and complications, was something she had dealt with. Now it was time to focus on what lay ahead. When Indy took the stage at the conference, she felt a wave of nervous energy, but it quickly passed. The crowd was warm, receptive. As she began to speak, telling the story of how her app came to life, the challenges she faced, and the lessons she learned along the way, she felt a sense of peace. The business was hers, the success was hers, and no one could take that away from her. After the speech, Indy was swarmed with people, all eager to talk to her, ask questions, and learn more about her journey. It was everything she had worked for, and more. The applause was deafening, and for the first time in a while, Indy allowed herself to enjoy it. She had earned every bit of this moment. No one could take that from her, not even Madison. Back home, as Indy sat on her balcony looking at the city skyline, a text message pinged on her phone. It was from her lawyer. "Madison has contacted us. She wants to settle things." Indy's heart skipped a beat. Could this really be happening? After everything, was Madison finally ready to face the consequences of her actions? Indy put the phone down for a moment, staring out at the view. A calm feeling washed over her. She didn't need to chase after anything anymore. Her success, her future, was already in motion. If Madison wanted to apologize, to make things right, it was too late for that. Indy had moved on. She had found her own way, and as Indy stood up and walked back inside, ready to tackle the next chapter of her business, she knew one thing for certain. She had become something she never thought possible. Not just a successful entrepreneur, but a person who, no matter the obstacles, had learned to trust herself and her own worth. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind for Indy. Her business was gaining more traction, and with each new partnership and expansion, it became more and more clear that the app she had created was a true game changer. Investors were lining up, eager to get a piece of the rapidly growing tech startup. Indy's days were packed with meetings, strategy sessions, and pitches to companies interested in collaborating. Her personal life, once dominated by late nights of coding and building, was now taken over by the demands of managing her growing empire. Still, despite her success, Indy couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something unresolved. Madison's attempts at reaching out were becoming more frequent. First, it was a simple text message. "Can we talk? I've been thinking about things." Then came the phone calls. Indy ignored them all. She had moved on. Her focus was on the future, on growing the company and pushing forward. But the messages kept coming, her sister pleading for a chance to explain, for a chance to make amends. One evening, Indy sat in her office, reviewing contracts and strategizing the next steps for the app's growth. The constant buzz of her phone reminded her that she was no longer alone in this journey. Her success had brought her into a new world, one full of opportunities, but also full of people with their own agendas. As she sifted through the paperwork, a new notification popped up on her screen. A voicemail from Madison. Indy hesitated for a moment before deciding to listen. Madison's voice, usually so composed, now carried an edge of desperation. "Indy, I know I've made mistakes," Madison began. "I never meant for things to get so out of hand. I know I hurt you, and I can't undo that. But what if we could work together? What if we could fix this? I've realized I've been wrong, and I'm sorry. Please, let's talk." Indy's stomach twisted. The apology felt genuine, but something inside her still recoiled. She wasn't sure if she could ever fully trust Madison again. The betrayal was too fresh. and yet a small part of her wondered if they could reconcile, if there was a way to rebuild what had been shattered. She sat back in her chair, lost in thought. It wasn't the first time Indy had questioned whether reconciliation was possible. She had lived with the sting of her sister's deceit for months, and even though the business was thriving, a piece of her felt like something was missing. Family had always been important to Indy. She had built the app to make a difference, but she had also done it for her family. She had wanted to make them proud, but could she forgive Madison? Could she ever let go of the anger and the feeling of betrayal? Indy wasn't sure. She'd always been someone who believed in second chances, but this time, it was different. This time, Madison had gone too far. Still, as Indy looked at the screen, watching her phone flash with a text from her sister, she knew that this wasn't something that could be ignored forever. The next day, Indy found herself standing at a familiar crossroads. Her office, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Her success had come at a price. She had fought for everything she had, and in the process, she had lost more than she cared to admit. As much as she had won, there was still something missing. Indy finally made up her mind. She called Madison back. They agreed to meet at a cafe, a neutral place where they could talk without the pressure of business or family drama hanging over them. As Indy walked into the cafe, she saw Madison sitting at a corner table, her usual polished look replaced with something more vulnerable. She looked like she had been through her own storm, and in that moment, Indy realized something. Her sister wasn't the only one who had changed. They exchanged a few pleasantries before the conversation turned serious. "I don't know where to begin," Madison said quietly, her voice lacking its usual confidence. Indy listened, her arms crossed, unsure of what to feel. But as Madison continued, a pattern started to emerge. She spoke about her own insecurities, about how, in her desperate desire to be successful, she had convinced herself that taking credit for Indy's work would make her feel validated. She had been jealous of Indy's focus and determination, something that Madison had always struggled with. Indy listened in silence, trying to process it all. There was a moment of raw honesty between them, something Indy hadn't expected. For the first time, she saw Madison not as the sister who had betrayed her, but as someone who had been lost in her own quest for approval and success. "I was wrong," Madison said finally, her eyes filled with regret. "I shouldn't have done what I did. I'm sorry, Indy. I thought taking credit would make everything better, but all it did was tear us apart." Indy took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions. She had never expected an apology from Madison, not in the way it had come. The road to reconciliation wasn't going to be easy, but Indy also knew that holding on to the anger would only weigh her down. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, not just for the business, but for their relationship as sisters. The conversation ended on a tentative note. They didn't have all the answers, but Indy felt like they had at least begun the process of rebuilding. It wouldn't be an overnight fix, but it was a start. Indy had learned a lot in the past few months, not just about business, but about forgiveness. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was ready to face it, with or without Madison by her side. As Indy left the cafe, she glanced at her phone. There was a new message from her lawyer. "We've received confirmation. Madison has agreed to the settlement. It's over." Indy paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in. It was done. She had won her business back. She had protected her patent, and she had reclaimed her truth. But the journey wasn't just about the victories in the business world. It was also about understanding that sometimes letting go of the past could be just as important as holding on to what you've worked for. With the next chapter of her life unfolding, Indy took a deep breath and smiled. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. The future was hers to shape, and this time, she would do it on her own terms. In the days that followed, Indy found herself adjusting to a new rhythm. The weight that had once sat heavily on her shoulders, the burden of constant conflict and betrayal, seemed to lift just a little bit each day. The business was thriving in ways she had only dreamed about before. With the patent securely in her hands and her name firmly at the forefront of the app's success, Indy finally felt like she was moving forward, not just professionally, but personally. Still, there were moments when she found herself reflecting on the strange, complicated journey that had led her here. Her newfound peace, however, wasn't without its challenges. As the business grew, so did the demands. Indy had always known the business world was a battlefield, but now it seemed like everyone wanted a piece of her success. Investors, media outlets, and potential collaborators were constantly in her ear, pushing for meetings, offering opportunities, and vying for her attention. Indy tried to manage it all, but she quickly realized she couldn't do everything herself. For the first time in her life, she hired a team to help with the operations, the marketing, and the day-to-day management. She built her company on the idea of collaboration and trust. And now it was time to let others in. Even with her team in place, Indy couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had everything she had worked for: the success, the recognition, and the respect. But there was an emptiness she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't that the victories weren't satisfying. It was just that something about the whole journey had left her feeling incomplete. She had once thought that achieving success would be enough, but now she understood that it wasn't just about the accolades or the growing bank account. It was about the people who mattered, the relationships she had once valued, and the connections that had been lost along the way. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, Indy found herself sitting in her office again, staring out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of how far she had come, but still, something tugged at her heart. She thought about her family, about the years spent building something meaningful, and about the fractured bond with her sister. No matter how much time passed, Indy realized, the cracks in their relationship remained. Could she ever fully repair things with Madison? Could she forgive and forget the betrayal? It wasn't just about what had happened. It was about whether or not she was willing to let go of the past to move forward. The question lingered in her mind for days. And then, as if fate was nudging her toward an answer, she received a call from their mother. Indy hadn't spoken to her in weeks, busy with the business and her own internal struggle. Their conversation was brief, but meaningful. Her mother, always the calm presence in Indy's life, offered a simple but profound piece of advice. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about them, Indy. It's about you. It's about finding peace in your heart, not for them, but for yourself. Indy sat with those words for a long time. Her mother had always been wise, and for the first time, Indy realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the wrongs done to her. It was about releasing the hold that anger and resentment had over her heart. She didn't have to forget what Madison had done. She didn't even have to welcome her back into her life fully. But she had to let go of the hurt, for her own peace, for her own future. The decision wasn't easy, but Indy knew it was the right one. A few days later, she reached out to Madison, finally ready to have the conversation that had been looming over them for so long. The meeting wasn't perfect. There were moments of silence, moments of awkwardness, and moments when both of them seemed unsure of how to proceed. But in the end, they spoke honestly, something they hadn't done in years. Madison admitted her mistakes, truly apologized, and for the first time, Indy saw her as a person, not just someone who had hurt her. The wounds weren't fully healed, but the conversation was a step forward. With Madison, it was a slow journey. There were no grand gestures or instant reconciliations, but Indy began to feel the healing process in her heart. She knew that rebuilding trust would take time, and that the past could never be completely erased. But they had begun, and that was enough. As Indy sat in her office a few weeks later, reflecting on everything that had transpired, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in months. The business was thriving. Her family, though still complicated, was on a path to healing. And most importantly, Indy had found peace within herself. She had fought for her success, fought for what was right, and fought for her future. And in doing so, she had also fought to find the courage to forgive, to let go, and to move forward. Indy wasn't just an entrepreneur anymore. She was someone who understood that true success wasn't measured in dollars or patents. It was measured in the relationships you built, the choices you made, and the strength you had to overcome the hardest battles. And as the app continued to grow, Indy knew that the real victory was in the peace she had found, a peace that came from knowing who she was and what she had accomplished, not just for the world, but for herself. And with that, Indy took a deep breath and smiled, ready for whatever came next. As time passed, Indy's life slowly began to settle into a new routine. The business continued to grow at an impressive rate. With each new update to the app and every new partnership, the product reached new heights, establishing Indy as a key player in the tech industry. Her company was no longer just a startup. It was becoming a brand, one that people trusted, one that people respected. But amidst all the success, Indy found herself more focused on the quiet moments than the public applause. She learned to cherish the time she spent with her close-knit team, those who had believed in her from the very beginning, and with her family who were starting to heal from the past. Her relationship with Madison remained fragile but real. They spoke often now, their conversations less about business and more about their shared memories, the ones that had once bound them as sisters. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of their history would make things uncomfortable, but there was progress. Indy had forgiven Madison, but forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant finding a way to coexist with the past without allowing it to dictate the future. Indy found that balance, and though it wasn't perfect, it was enough. Even though Indy had achieved everything she set out to do, there were moments when the rush of success felt distant. She realized that success, in its purest form, wasn't about climbing higher or collecting more accolades. It was about the journey, learning, evolving, and finding fulfillment along the way. She began to make time for herself again, something she hadn't done in years. She took long walks in the park, spent evenings reading, and even revisited her original dreams and inspirations for the app. Those quiet moments of creativity that had sparked it all in the first place. Her business had changed her, but in the best possible way. Indy was no longer just the person who had a brilliant idea. She was someone who had faced challenges, navigated betrayals, and emerged stronger. She had fought not just for the app, but for herself. Through the late nights, the moments of doubt, the unexpected family drama, and the business deals, Indy had built something far more valuable than any app or patent. She had built resilience, wisdom, and inner strength. One evening, Indy sat in her favorite spot on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The world below seemed so full of possibility. There was still work to be done, more goals to reach, more dreams to chase. But in that moment, Indy was content. She had learned that life wasn't just about the battles won or the hurdles overcome. It was about knowing that you had the strength to move forward, no matter what came your way. Indy smiled to herself, knowing that whatever challenges the future held, she was ready for them. She had not only created a successful business, but she had also learned the art of balance, forgiveness, and self-empowerment. And with that, Indy felt at peace, knowing that her journey was hers to shape, not defined by others or by the past, but by the choices she made moving forward. The future, it seemed, was full of endless possibilities, and Indy Nova was ready to seize them all.